All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. You will see people holding a microphone today, and it will not be amplifying our sound, but it will be used so that we can audio and video record this and post it later once we get captions up. So welcome to the STEM Teaching Essentials Workshop. My name's Corey Fada-Hartley. I'm Assistant Dean for Curriculum Coordination in the College of Natural Science. I work with a team of other people to host these workshops throughout the semester, which includes Laura Bix, who's an Assistant Dean in the College of Ag and Natural Resources, Suzanne Lang, who's an Associate Dean in the College of Ag and Natural Resources as well, Kendra Charavello, where are you? Kendra is an Associate Dean in Lyman Briggs College. And Niraj Buck is the Associate Dean for Undergraduate Education in the College of Engineering, and he's not here today, but he helps us with this. So this is the first one of the semester. I'm not going to introduce the speakers. I'm going to hand it over to Laura to do that in a minute, but I hope that you will continue to check out the workshops that we have planned throughout the semester. The next one is a month from today, and the topic is Teaching and Assessing Transferable Skills in STEM Classes. That will be led by Erica Wehrwein and John Zubek from the College of Natural Science. Really fantastic teachers who will be talking about doing exciting things in their classes. So the registration for that will be basically at the same place and on the STEM Teaching Essentials website, and we'll get that open in a day or two. When we have discussion throughout the day today, we will ask you to wait, raise your hand and wait until we can give you this microphone so that it can be recorded properly on the video. So please try to refrain from talking until you get that microphone. Okay, so now I'm going to hand it over to Laura. Oops, and I already forgot.
So, as was mentioned, I'm Laura Bix. I'm delighted to be here, and it's my great pleasure to introduce the three speakers today. Bill Heinrich, I believe, will be going first. Bill is the Director of Assessment at the Learning Hub. Patty Stewart, who I always want to call Patty Smith. I make her a rock star every time I think of her. She is the Director of Instructional Development at AAN. And Jeff Grable, who is the Associate Provost of Teaching and Learning and Technology for the university. It's been my great pleasure to work with each of them and see the way that they are expanding, I think, not just how Michigan State views teaching and learning, but really how we view teaching and learning across the academy. And they're going to share with you some of the insights and some of the ways that they're really revolutionizing the culture around teaching and learning, as I said, throughout the academy. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jeff first.
Thank you. So if I use both of these microphones, it's okay, or do I confuse you? I'm good. All right. So thank you for the opportunity to be here today. This is an extraordinary group. It's one of my favorite groups of people on campus. And so anytime we get a chance to hang out with you, it's really a pleasure. And it's a pleasure today because you've given us an opportunity to present to you a couple of things that are coming that are available as resources to campus. And we're interested in your feedback on them, and we're absolutely interested in you using them. So I'm going to introduce both of them. They're only really connected in the sense that we're here today. And then I'm going to be available to answer questions, but turn it over to my colleagues who have really been leading these efforts. So the first of those is My Spartan Story, which is a co-curricular record for campus. And I want to give you a little context for why we've spent time investing in developing this. The Hub's role has been to facilitate the design of this co-curricular record, which in some respects has been a project that MSU has been tinkering around with for a decade. And it's really designed to be a critical piece of infrastructure that's necessary for the campus to ask and answer a question that is a favorite of mine, and I'm asking it of the campus every time I get a chance. And that is, why would any human being come to East Lansing, of all places, and spend a great deal of money to go to school? I think that's a really critical question, and I don't think it's an easy answer. Faculty love to answer it easily. They say, oh, to study with me. I would answer it that way, but I'm not sure that's the best answer. I think that's an existential question, and there are sectors of U.S. higher education right now where the inability of students to clearly answer that question and come to those institutions is putting them under a great deal of pressure. I think it presents a different kind of challenge for this institution, and the challenge for us is is really, why would anyone come here? We have to be able to do things which are unique or relatively unique to MSU. That is, there are things that they can learn here that they can't learn other places. Or there are ways they can learn here which add tremendous value to their lives. And so for people to continue to come to East Lansing and spend a great deal of money at the scale at which we exist, we have to come up with increasingly compelling answers to do that. And I think we do that. But one of the parts that makes a residential experience valuable is not precisely what goes on inside the classroom, but the things that go on in relationship to the classroom or instead of the classroom. And that's really what my Spartan story is about. It's a piece of infrastructure that we need as a campus if we're going to enable students and faculty to identify co-curricular learning experiences as valuable and to help students tell compelling and assessment-rich stories about what they're learning and doing in those co-curricular experiences. And so we're really excited about it. We took 2 years in the design work. We involved nearly 400 people around campus to help think through what a co-curricular record might be for this campus. And I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Bill, who's going to talk a little bit about, in more detail about what my Spartan story is and the opportunity that we hope you take advantage of as faculty.
Thanks, Jeff. Hi, everybody. Again, I'm Bill Heinrich, and I'm in charge of assessment at MSU's Hub for Innovation, Learning, and Technology. It's nice to see some familiar faces. So like Jeff said, we've involved hundreds of people on this campus. Many of you have actually been involved in different design conversations. So again, thanks. I want to specifically reach out to Lizzie King, who's in the room from undergraduate research, and our colleague Heather Shea, who's not here today, but for helping me create this presentation and continue to advance this project in really meaningful ways. So thanks, Lizzie and Heather. Thanks, Patty, for the slide deck. So my Spartan story is a story of a co-curricular record. We're interested in the question the provost asked us, which is, what is the case for co-curricular on this campus? A couple different ways to answer that, depending on where you sit on the on campus. From my background, I come out of the study of student affairs and the study of higher education and assessment, so I'm really interested from that perspective why we might do things. But the campus in our design conversations have been co-informative in this space, and so the record we've created is actually really robust. It doesn't represent any one point of view, so we're not just capturing leadership, we're not just capturing internships or undergraduate research, we're actually capturing a lot of different things in one place, and that's a really important value proposition for this project. What we like to think of, though, is a story of our values. So anytime, as an assessment person, anytime we count something or document something or record something, we're making a value proposition. We're saying to the world or to ourselves, this is what we care about, enough to bother counting it or measuring it or assess it. And that's a really important point of view. But artifacts like this are, in fact, cultural artifacts. They're a representation of who we are and what we care about. And in turn, they represent our institutional values. So if we're not counting something, do we really care about it? And that's, I think, a fair question in this case. In large part, we've been looking at co-curricular experiences and counting them. And most of us keep that information on our desktops or on our local servers. And we can't actually access that information and learn from it as a community. And that's become problematic in the current era as well. So the other layer is, if we're responsive to the existing culture, like we keep records on our desktops, perhaps we can shape future cultures, future versions of ourselves. And that's an important value proposition here too. So the process we took to build this record, like Jeff said, it was outreach oriented, it was design oriented. In fact, once we realized how big and decentralized this place is, yet again, we adopted a human-centered design approach, which just means that we reached out to a lot of people before deciding which software to use. So we were really interested in understanding the ways in which different groups on campus, all the colleges, dozens of student affairs and student life and student activity providers, including the colleges, all do different co-curricular activities. And so human-centered design gives voice to that. We wanted to make sure that, the options for software were somewhat limited. Some we could see clearly didn't do what we wanted, but we didn't know what else was out there. And having those design conversations allowed us to really make a better decision when it came to software design, procurement. We ended up buying a vended system, but because it represents the pedagogy that we value. So the way we understand ourselves in general, in broad terms, is we have a series of learning activities on this campus. Many of them land on the transcript already. We know this, we love this, we've been doing it forever. The transcript is really a document that was designed to communicate from institution to institution, so it's not a very information-rich document when it comes to sharing information for students from a student to an employer or to a graduate school or something like that. The existing transcript we know captures program requirements, courses for credit, certificates. If someone's a music major, it'll capture a recital, things that aren't really credited but are required for graduation. We also already do a lot of these not-for-credit involvement kinds of things, which are indeed educative. So we have leadership opportunities, we have undergraduate research, we have internships, we have co-ops. We have student employment, which is often a learning opportunity. Some of your undergraduate researchers or ULAs are actually employees. That's what I'm talking about. So these are really rich opportunities for students to be involved, for students to actually learn things. And what we're aiming to do with the co-curricular record is actually just create a data boundary on this. We don't have this information in one place, like I said, and doing so allows us to actually learn from it as an organization. What we're all interested in are these pedagogical connections in the middle. This is what makes interesting MSU graduates. When a student can say, in my service learning thing, I applied this concept from your class. That's a really cool moment. That's what we really want our students. We want interesting graduates. We want people to go out in the world and make a difference. That's where they do that. They have to make sense of that. We can help them. We can guide them. Individual faculty, individual staff can help and guide that. But students do this. What we're going to show students is what they're doing on the right side of this picture in a dashboard, and I'll show you what that looks like in just a moment. So we're aiming to capture these things so we can represent that middle space and do a better job of that kind of work on this campus. From a definition standpoint, we did a lot of research in the background. There's not an agreed upon definition of what co-curricular activity is, so we made up our own, bounded by what we know to be true at MSU. So we have curricular things on your left. We have extracurricular things on the right. In this context, extracurricular things are like going to a football game, right? It's an MSU thing. It's not necessarily an educative activity, although there are a lot of things get learned. And then in the middle, we're really going for the intentional, high-quality learning experiences that we're already doing. So the things you already sponsor, the faculty work, undergraduate research, the internships your departments sponsor or coordinate, these kinds of things are what goes in the middle. And that's really what we're documenting on the co-curricular record, or in the platform we call My Spartan Story, which is this. It's an interactive platform. It's like a diary for students. It shows them the data that if you offer an experience and you list a student and that they've participated, that data goes on in this platform in My Spartan Story. So it's passive in that sense. Students don't need to do anything yet. Then they can engage and take notes and reflect and do other kinds of activities and share that information with other audiences, however they decide they want to share. So we're really interested in capturing all of these intentional activities wherever they occur. We're going a step further. We're putting an MSU signature on it. So registrar will sign off on this. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. So in the platform, students can discover activities. There's a catalog. If you post an opportunity and make it public, it goes into a public-facing catalog. So it's another discoverability opportunity. If you have a scholarship or if you have an activity or a thing you want students to do that's fairly public, or even if it's an application-based, you can still list it and then refer people to the website where the application exists. So it doesn't have to be hidden. As you know, it's another discoverable opportunity in which students can then participate, learn, and document their learning. And then there's this reflection opportunity in the system where students are able to do that pedagogical integration, make sense of their world in new and different and exciting ways, gain this perspective and self-awareness, and then essentially communicate these ideas to other audiences. This is a screenshot of mystory.msu.edu. Again, that's mystory.msu.edu. If I'm boring you, feel free to look that up right now. It's live as of this week. We're pretty excited about opening that door. In My Story, faculty and staff can add opportunities for students to join, and then students will be able to find themselves on those opportunities as well as do these other actions like discover, engage, and reflect. All of this leads to a document called the Spartan Experience Record. This is the outcome product. This is the thing that goes adjacent to the transcript. It's a complement to it. In fact, when students send us transcript, they'll be given the option from the registrar to also send their Spartan Experience Record starting in May. At that point, this is where it gets a little nuanced, so bear with me. Students can curate their Spartan experience record for sharing. They cannot curate their transcript. They still can't. They never could. We don't really want that. But for a lot of reasons, like student, in a Young Democrats club in the college wants to sign up and work for Republican Senator so-and-so and didn't want that thing to show up. That's okay. They can curate that sharing opportunity so they can decide what to put out there on the Spartan Experience record. So for lots of reasons, students might not want to share or might want to share certain things to different audiences. So it's curatable in that sense. The database is not curatable. It's a MSU record, so we keep the data for the student in perpetuity like their transcript and academic record. So that's the record. Students will have access to a dashboard. The dashboard will show them what they're involved in, what's pending, what's not approved, what is approved, how things are going. If you offer a non-credit educative activity that fits in this space, you are the validator. We're not making any new work. If you assessed learning in undergraduate research not for credit before, you would do the same thing now. There's no real difference in work activity. It's just a different place to keep the record at that point, which allows us as a large community to do a couple things. One is it puts all the data in one place so we can actually look at student pathways together, get an IRB, ask intelligent questions of this data and decide whether or not we want to go in a different direction, whether or not as a campus we want to spend money in different areas. That's a really interesting point of view. The other thing it does is it allows individual faculty. So if you're sponsoring or supervising a number of undergraduate researchers, for example, you can keep track of them here and pull all that data from this platform. So you can actually run your own reports at any time of year you need to figure out how many students you've been sponsoring. They can be paid, unpaid. You don't have to go to the HR system and the other student employment system. You can put it all right here. You still have to keep those other HR, you still have to pay students when you agree to pay them, right? So this is not a substitute for HR, but it is a way to put all your records in one place, which lowers the kind of lift when you need to run reports for, about certain kinds of student supervision activity. So there is a benefit to using this platform and putting the data in one place for different kinds of users, like yourselves, I hope. This is a prototype, not the final product, the prototype of the Spartan Experience Record document. Again, adjacent to the transcript as a complement. You'll notice, the transcript, like I said, is not very data rich in terms of description. It tells us a lot, and we all know where to go look for that data. But the employers are always like, well, what does this mean? So from an employer-facing standpoint, the Spartan Experience Record actually has a lot more text information about the kind of learning activity that was going on, the learning outcomes themselves, the duration, timestamps, things like, and descriptions of that activity. So students can use this document to communicate with, like I said, employers or graduate schools. Fair caveat here, in our research and run up to this, we found very little literature or evidence that employers broadly will care. So we're not starting there as a value proposition. Now, we're big enough and we're creating a record robust enough at this campus that we could actually create demand for employers to start caring about this. So there's a really interesting proposition there, but we just don't know. Some employers in some sectors really want this, but it's a pretty narrow band right now, at least in literature. So as an assessment person, I'm not going to make a claim that this is what's going to happen, that employers are going to care. But we have an opportunity to help students tell that story in a new way, and I think that's really exciting. That is something I'm willing to get behind. So again, data-rich, text-driven. We are running a process this semester, because we're going to launch this in May, this record part, to actually do a campus-level inclusive design of the final product, the final actual design of this document. So we want this to break a mold. This is a different kind of student record. We want this to look different than the transcript, and so we're aiming for that in our design process. So look for opportunities to engage in that design process. There'll be opportunities for people to give feedback. In the record itself, you have activities that you offer and positions within that. So you might have multiple student or multiple kinds of ULAs. You might have a ULA and a ULA mentor. Those are different positions within the activity of undergraduate learning assistants. So these activities are essentially MSU sponsored. They're stuff we already do, and they are aligned with undergraduate learning goals or other relevant learning outcomes. So these things, right, this is MSU's value proposition. We have undergraduate learning goals. If you're not aware of them, they're in the checklist when you add an activity to this, so you'll have to become aware of them to get through the validation process. And what we're interested in is knowing what what the learning outcomes are, though, at the discrete level. So if you have undergraduate learning assistants, we want to know, what do you think they're actually gaining from doing that kind of work? What are those students actually learning? So you need to write that down as part of this. Pretty detailed, but we have coaching and tutorials that pop up right now on the website. We'll have more information as we get better at this. There's a database sort of form. It's live now. If you want to get into it and mess around, go ahead. If you don't submit, it doesn't do anything, and you can still play around with it. But again, contact us at the hub. We can send somebody out to your office or to your team to help you upload activities starting this week, actually. So that's, like I said, we're live. We do have a campus leadership layer that helps us ensure quality. So we have this advisory and validation committee, which looks at the quality of these non-credit activities. So caveat here, we're not going to evaluate whether or not your undergraduate research activity is high quality. That's still your problem in your department. We do have liaisons from undergraduate research office to make sure that the quality markers are in place, but you have to tell us what's going on in that space. So just to be real clear, nobody's going to evaluate that. When it comes to the rest of co-curricular activity, we're looking for is markers of high impact practices, which is a research-driven protocol for non-credit learning focused activities. So I can talk more about that in great detail, but it'll get too long right here. But we do have standards. We want to make sure that what goes on the record is of high quality, and so we have a peer review process to do that. We also have a steering committee which makes sure we get this thing funded and advocates for all the different layers that we'll need to work on a big campus like this. So just to give you a sense as I wrap up here, some of the data points, this is the dashboard that unit leaders will be able to see to run your own reports. So we're looking just, there's total opportunities, students with at least X experience, active students with no participation, total hours, total experience. So there's lots of data points you can see on your desktop to help you inform your own practice in whatever discrete activity you're doing. This will be available to unit leaders. So, it could be who's ever coordinating your undergraduate research or coordinating your ULAs. That would be the person who has access to this dashboard. But they can share that at the unit level. There's no, right, and we can give different permissions. It's not a matter of who, it's just a matter of who has the right access in your unit for that kind of information. So that gives us a kind of a brief introduction and overview into my Spartan story and the Spartan experience record. I do want to mention that, so for internships and undergraduate research in particular, those things might have very similar looking experiences for students that are, on one hand, are credit bearing, like students might sign up for an independent study or an undergraduate research experience credit, and on the other hand are non-credit. You can actually keep track of both of those kinds of experiences in one place now in this My Spartan Story platform. And so we're working on the workflow to make sure that all works. There will be a select box that says credit, non-credit. The non-credit version will send that information to the Spartan Experience record. The credit checkbox will send it to the transcript. So it doesn't really change any of our existing practices except add the Spartan Experience record documentation to the non-credit activity. So again, trying to lower the number of places you have to keep data and also get a better sense of how many opportunities on this campus really exist for students. That's still an open question. We think we know, but we're getting better at documenting with this record. So I'm open. I have a few minutes for questions. If anybody has any burning questions about the record or the process. Yes? Oh yeah, microphone coming. I need to share this one.
Two quick questions. One, the first is to make sure I'm understanding, can either a student or a faculty member initiate a record and either way it gets validated?
Yes, actually, that's a great question. Either a student or faculty can initiate. We are focusing our efforts now on faculty and staff initiation primarily. And the reason we want to do that is to make sure that positions on this campus, like the RA resident assistant position, there's 344 of them. I don't want 344 different initiations. So I'm going to have Res Ed initiate that one for the bulk. But yeah, so students can drive this. The workflow sends it to the email they select for approval.
And how is this being announced to students?
Not yet. So like I said, we literally launched what's today, Tuesday? Yesterday, we opened. So we are actually, our first efforts are to engage lots of faculty and staff in putting opportunities into the database. So and then we're developing, well, we have a marketing plan, but we're developing a initiation for that, a cell, right? We need students to engage in this. And so the marketing will launch probably around mid-semester, focus on students. So just a point of clarification, we will accept records for 18-19 academic year this year. We will not accept records prior to fall of 18. And all these records have to start somewhere, and that's our line. And so unfortunately, juniors and seniors aren't our first audience right now. We understand that. Sorry. Please help them with their resumes. That being said, going forward, we anticipate having a very robust student-facing record. So, good question. Yeah, Rachel?
So if you have a class that has, say, 30 ULAs, do you have to enter all this information for each one, or do you enter the job description, then attach people's names?
Yeah, the latter.
Okay.
Yeah, we will streamline that as best as we can. And again, we have coaches and folks who can help you do that.
And so positions that would fit under the Discover section seem numerous and all over the place.
That's
Are
correct.
you anticipating several years of redundancy where it's going to get posted in one hub where students are used to finding research opportunities and then eventually segueing them over to this?
Yeah, we are anticipating some redundancy. Hopefully, our goal is to move more of the opportunities here. So we've been coordinating closely with the Office of Undergraduate Research to help you do that. And so we're actually, Lizzie's nodding, thank you, Lizzie. Lizzie is from the Undergraduate Research Office and has been involved from day one. And so we're making sure we don't do redundancies. But like this week, for example, we've moved URAF registration to this platform. So we've just moved it, right? So there's no redundancy. You just can't do the old thing anymore. So we're going to take steps like that, and as we roll out more features in the platform, we'll be driving more of the traffic to this platform. Is that? Yeah. Okay. Great. Well, we'll I guess one more.
Wait.
Go 1 second.
I can only run so fast.
So when the students leave MSU,
Yeah.
does that record end, or do you try and keep track of the student where they go into industry? Because that would give some feedback.
That would give feedback. Yeah, the question was, when a student leaves MSU, does a record end, or do we try to keep track of a student in their early employment, postgraduate years, which would give feedback to departments in a lot of ways? Is that fair? So yeah, good question, man. That's that's the gold standard for outcomes data, right? No, we do not. We're looking at MSU sponsored activities. So once students graduate, we stop tracking the kinds of things they're doing in or outside of the classroom. It is a permanent record, like the transcript, so it lives at MSU for as long as we keep records at MSU. That seems to be a long time. And then there are groups that do track that information in career and employment research, but we're not dovetailing this system with those systems at this point. Good questions. Thanks. You want to transition?
So one of the things that I wanted to highlight as it relates particularly to the group we're talking to today is how useful this will be for large institutional grants about STEM education. So one of the things that we've had to do in the past, for example, for a Howard Hughes Medical Institute grant proposal, just the proposal, was to try to estimate the number of people who have research experiences. Wow. And this is going to be a really rich source of data to try to address. And those are usually pretty big institutional grants.
Yeah.
So it's
Thanks,
be
Corey.
really
Yeah,
great.
as Lizzie, do you want to talk about that? Go ahead.
Thanks, Bill. I'll mention that from the Undergraduate Research Office perspective, many of you know that while we allocate funding and we do provide professional development opportunities for students, we haven't done a lot in the way of for faculty for many years. Part of that is capacity of our office. We are 2, now 3 full-time people. The other piece of that is we want you to do your work and let you have ownership over what that looks like. So what we're hoping for is that by doing this, we're going to create space for you to document, and then it really is attaching the faculty mentor to all of this data over time. So we're imagining, we've worked with some faculty in the development of this so that you can go in and say, how many students have I mentored, and what has that work looked like over 5, 10 years or 3 semesters? And so that's the rich part here, is that it's collecting, it's documenting information you have that we don't have currently. We might provide the funding at times, but we don't always know who's doing what. And so this is kind of our way of coming together to do that. So, yeah.
Great. And we'll have time for more conversation after the next speaker, so please write your questions down and we'll move forward. Thank you.
I'll give it back to you. So we're going to do a quick transition. So the Associate Provost for Teaching, Learning, and Technology at Michigan State fundamentally has 2 things in the portfolio. One of them is the Hub for Innovation in Learning and Technology, and the Co-Curricular record as a project was tossed to us by the provost to facilitate. The second thing in the portfolio of the person who has that job, which is me right now, is what we now call Educator Professional Development, which structurally lives in the Academic Advancement Network, but is fundamentally my responsibility. So confusing in all the ways that MSU is confusing, but while the first project came out of the Hub part of that portfolio, the second project comes out of the Educator Professional Development, AAN part of that portfolio. And so one of the things that I happen to believe that teaching and learning are pretty important, exciting, highly valuable. And one of the tasks given to me by the provost is to strengthen the culture and practice of learning and teaching on this campus. And so there are a number of things that you'll start to see more insistently out of the Academic Advancement Network with regard to educator professional development that are intended to support the campus. And one of the things that's interesting about this campus is that centrally, our approach to teaching and learning has been relatively weak historically. We've never had a Center for Teaching and Learning. We frankly have not invested a great deal of time and money in the provost's office. What has happened on campus is that colleges have taken up that mantle in uneven ways, but they've taken it up. This is one of the strongest instances of a teaching and learning community, probably the strongest instance of a teaching and learning community on this campus, which is why I value it so highly. And there are strengths to the fact that educator professional development is distributed in the colleges. And one of the things that I'm keen to do is find opportunities to invest in what's going on in colleges. So there's one specific project that we are quite excited about that we hope you take up in your units, and that is the development of a toolkit to recognize and understand effective teaching that supports student learning. So let me explain the context of that just for 30 more seconds, and I'll turn it over to Patty, who's going to walk you through it. There are 2 things that this toolkit is designed to do, and it's built on work that's gone on in the College of Ag and Natural Resources, and so you'll see that in the toolkit. I've got 3 copies of the toolkit that I'll pass around. Don't steal them yet. Flip through and pass them around. We'll give them to you. And so it's built on work in the College of Ag and Natural Resources and developed over the last year with chairs and faculty in that college and in the College of Arts and Letters. And so really what we're trying to do with the toolkit is help you solve a more practical problem in your units about how do you recognize, understand, and reward effective teaching. Research historically, particularly at an institution like this, has been easier for us to understand and value. Teaching is a little bit more challenging. And one of the things that sometimes happens on this campus that should never happen is that we use one measure, usually the student rating system, to measure effective teaching. That is a terrible idea. Don't do it. So the question is, how do we do it more effectively and more collegially and more conversationally in our units? And that's really what the toolkit is designed to help solve. So the culture part of this is that if units take up some of the practices in the toolkit and they deploy some of the practices in the toolkit, the culture of teaching and learning in your units is going to be strengthened. So I'll let Patty walk through the toolkit with you. The last thing that I'll say about it is look for us to invite you to come to some sessions to learn how to use the toolkit and work with it. What we would like you to do is come in groups from units. So we would like groups of 3 or 4 faculty administrators from any given unit to come participate in these workshops, because the way that we'll do them will ask you to unpack the toolkit, work with the toolkit within the context of your own practices in your units, and hopefully revise those things in ways which enhance the culture of teaching and learning. So with that, I will distribute these toolkits so that you can sort of leaf through them if you like to. We'll turn it over to Patty, who will do the hard work. Thanks, Patty.
Well, it's not so hard, actually. Thank you all for the opportunity to be here. It's been my pleasure to be working on this it's been a collaborative effort. So Kelly, Laura, Jeff, and I have spent the last, sorry.
Yeah, it's just for the video. Are you on?
Okay, I'll speak louder. All right. So I've had the privilege to work with Kelly, Laura, Jeff, and many of the folks around that I call friends and colleagues have given input into this. We've had people share resources. So it really has been just trying to collect all the efforts around teaching evaluation that are currently happening on campus, and then also bringing together some of the best practices that we know from literature. So this was sort of, it's a guiding principle for me in my work at AAN, but also we quoted this in our toolkit as well. I think it sums up sort of why this is really important. So if the premise of higher education is that teaching by highly educated individuals engaged in ongoing learning of their own produces a valuable opportunity for students to learn essential knowledge and skills that prepare them for life and career. One of the things that most of the folks that I work with recognize is that learning and teaching is an ongoing process. So finding ways to document this process and have better conversations about it is why I do the work that I do. And it's also part of the culture that Jeff was talking about that we're trying to promote. As he mentioned, the SIR system has been, we did a little bit of digging to see what the history of this was here at MSU, and surprisingly, nobody really knew. So the best evidence we could find was it dates back to the late 1960s when they started developing some of the policies in the faculty contract and also the Code of Teaching Responsibility. So there was no kind of set date when they decided to start doing this, but it is common practice nationwide to use student evaluations for oftentimes the sole evaluation of teaching. And some of the problems with that are these instruments only measure what the students' perceptions are of the class, as you probably all well know. I've sat down with numerous faculty on campus who are frustrated because that's the only way that they're evaluated on their teaching effectiveness. And so, and also frustration around what does this tell me about what I should do differently in my class, or what do these numbers mean? It really doesn't give an instructor any kind of assistance on what to do with the course and how they should actually make adjustments. In addition to those two challenges, there's also lots of literature around the bias and the validity of using these measures. And part of the reason why we do this is because it gives you a number. It's very, it's an easy way. I'm working on a project with Ann Austin looking at how other institutions also evaluate their teaching. And the one thing that keeps coming up is it's a very efficient, easy way to develop a number that you can measure across different units, different colleges, that kind of thing, which really is very complicated and probably an oversimplification of what's actually happening. So we looked at this toolkit in kind of developing some of the ideas around it. We linked it to the Student Success Initiative. And so some of the things that kind of came out that guided the efforts of the toolkit are focusing on student learning outcomes to improve student success, engaging in reflective and more innovative practice as far as teaching, creating spaces where conversations about teaching can actually take place. There are some places on campus I've found that are really great at this. Colleagues kind of get together and have informal conversations. But it doesn't happen as often as it probably should. Some of the spaces we've already have for these kinds of conversations, the Adams Academy Fellows, especially in the last couple of years, have been being trained in how to do classroom observations and how to have conversations about teaching, so it's a little more comfortable. But for the most part, people seem to be really uncomfortable with talking about what kinds of things happen in their classroom. So we want to make that more commonplace. Acknowledging that both success and failure are inherent in classroom practice. If you're going to try something new, the chances are that it's going to work perfectly the first time are pretty slim. So recognizing that faculty and instructors should not be punished for trying new and innovative practice in their classroom. I've got just a few more. Thinking about how we create more inclusive classroom environments by integrating more multiple perspectives and even experiences within the disciplines. Different ways to deliver the content and ways to kind of enhance that across this is tied to some of the innovative practices and not making it so that if you're trying something new in your classroom, trying a new delivery method, that it's actually a safe place for you to do that and explore. And finally, using evidence-based instructional practices, which a lot of the programs that AAN has traditionally done, the Lilly Fellowship, the Adams Academy, a lot of the learning communities explore these types of things. So there's already opportunities to do this, but as Jeff mentioned, we're looking for ways to really build the network and connect with folks out in the colleges and departments to do more of these kinds of things. So a current draft is available here. It's a work in progress. It's now pretty from the working draft that we've been working on in Google Docs, but it's not by any means the finished product. I would like to, let's see, we'll pull that up so I can show you. Can you pull up the Toolkit PDF? Perfect. And just scroll down to the table of contents. All right, so I'm just going to briefly walk through what some of the things are in here. The one thing that I found in the research with Ann Austin and also kind of digging up some kinds of more information for the toolkit is that we don't have a shared vision of what effective teaching looks like. So this introduction kind of gives some support to how to structure those conversations. The departments and the colleges all have autonomy in how they define that for themselves. So we're not trying to tell people that it has to be this way or it has to be that way. But what this toolkit is doing is kind of giving some guidance as to how to structure those conversations. So the toolkit is divided out into the different components. The teaching and learning evaluation, so we all know that we use SIRS as one of the measures, but some of the other measures that we're advocating for are peer observations. And so we talk about some of the assumptions and some of the challenges in peer observations are directly discussed in the toolkit, some key definitions so that everybody's talking about the same thing. Some of what the goals should actually be for a peer observation that informs teaching evaluation, and also some ideas about the process. So there are lots of observation instruments and things like that. We've included a couple in here, but it's really up to you all to have conversations about what kinds of things you would want to use, what kinds of instruments, what kind of tools work best in your current situations. We also go into how many folks are actually compiling their own teaching portfolio, something like that. How many folks wait until it's time to do an annual evaluation when you start scrambling to find all that stuff? Another one of the things that we're doing in the Adams Academy is helping people think about their teaching portfolio and building that out so you can better communicate what's happening in your classroom. And as a happy aside, it also makes it easier to pull together all those things for annual evaluation. And it builds in reflective practice. So there are some guidelines in here on what kinds of artifacts you might collect, what kinds of things you might think about when you're doing that. It's a guide to help think about those kinds of things, both from the person who's collecting all the information and also from a reviewer standpoint. We give you a whole protocol on how to do the observations, what kinds of things should happen before, what kinds of things you might want to look for during. and then what kinds of things, how to have that conversation afterwards that's actually productive and gives you some sense of where you should go with your teaching, rather than, oh, you did a great job, and that's usually the extent of how it goes, because it's uncomfortable to give colleagues productive feedback. So we talk a little bit more about the teaching portfolio in here and kind of the different kinds of things. There are recommendations for how to do mid-course feedback. We also included in the appendix, there are a bunch of these different instruments. And also, I know Lyman Briggs is using the SALG, the Student Assessment of Learning Gains, as part of it's a survey that actually gets students to reflect on what kinds of things they've learned in the class, which I think is much more informative than whether or not you like the class or you didn't like the instructor's shoes that day, or whatever happens to be, show up on those SIRs at the end of the semester. So that's pretty much it. You can actually go and take a look at this. I would welcome feedback and any kind of, let's see, if we can go back to the slide with all of the contact information on it. I didn't ask, but I included Kelly and Laura, and Jeff and I are all on there. So if you have questions or you have suggestions or things that you, any kind of feedback would be really welcome. So any questions now that you'd like to ask or share? Yes. Hold on. We need the...
It's coming.
Okay.
Maybe you can rephrase my question so everybody can
Okay.
hear. So what's the timeline? I assume you need to replace the server at some point?
Yes. So the question was about the timeline for the toolkit. This is actually the first time it's gone live. Anybody going to this link will be seeing it. Other than the few folks we've asked for feedback along the way, this is the first kind of public display of the toolkit. So this semester, we're hoping to put together some workshops. In my role in AEN, I've done some conversations with, physiology. We talked about how to do classroom observations and sort of some of the process and things like that. So we've done some of these ad hoc, but we're looking at developing some workshops this semester that are more formalized, that we can have groups of people, as Jeff had mentioned, come together. So from here on out, we'll see what develops and what kind of support that individual departments might need or colleges might need. You got a question back there?
This is all really exciting stuff. I'm really excited to see what is in the toolkit and such, and try and implement it in the respective departments. I was wondering, is there any hope for revising or replacing SIRS, like in the next 50 years?
I'm going to let Jeff take that one.
How do I answer that question? Yeah, there is. So somebody like me needs to take on a project like this like I need a hole in the head, but it's really not my project to take on. So here's where we are. You tell me if I'm wrong, but every dean I've talked to, every chair I've talked to over the last couple of years, particularly because I have a role that's new at MSU, it routinely comes up, almost always comes up, what are we going to do about those student rating systems? So I have a felt sense, my shins are bruised, that there's fairly widespread dissatisfaction with the tool. So given that, we're going to make a run at changing the instrumentation of student ratings. So what does that look like? That's a governance issue. That's not my project. It doesn't live in my portfolio. The provost is created the space for us to take a run at that if we want to, but that's really going to run through academic governance. The problem historically with institutions changing their rating system is it's political, because it has something to do with whether you're retained as an employee of this institution if you teach. And everybody understands that. And it's also political in a very functional sense. It usually takes longer than one academic year. So when you have a change in governance committees, they usually try to start all over again, which is a terrible idea. It's why governance makes me tear my hair out. So here's where we are with this. We have prepared a white paper, a scholarly white paper, not too terribly long, that we will give to Mark Largent and to guide governance on this, because this is not a poorly defined problem, right? Student rating systems have been around U.S. higher education forever. There are good ones, there are bad ones, there are validated instruments, there are ways of constructing these things that make sense, and there are ways that don't. There's two things about the role of student ratings in the evaluation of teaching which are terribly important. One is, don't use one measure, right? We solve all sorts of problems on any academic campus if we have multiple measures and conversations about how we understand effective teaching. So over-reliance on one measure is a terrible idea. We should probably stop doing that wherever on campus we're doing that. And this takes some pressure off any particular instrument. Having said that, there are some instruments that are better than others. And so that white paper that we'll give to Mark Largent and to governance suggests that we might, as a campus, consider 3 types. We're trying to give them a fairly well-defined problem. All of them would be great. I think all of them would be better than what we have. That's what we think the research that we've done tells us. But at that point in time, we turn it over to governance, and they do what governance does, because this is a conversation that faculty have to be aware of, and faculty have to participate in, and faculty have to own, and faculty have to decide. This is not something that any associate provost, God forbid, or any provost is just going to make a decision about. Does that make some sense? So it's complicated, but whether it's a terrible idea or not, it seems like I got asked constantly to make a run at this. Even though it's not my job. So we're gonna do our best as colleagues to support governance to see whether they decide to take this up and have conversations with campus about it. So that's where we are. Does that make sense?
So should I go ahead? So Jeff partly answered my question talking about the 3 types of instruments, but I was just curious, you mentioned in some of the material in the toolkit about other ways of eliciting student feedback. And I was just curious in your group's work, sort of if you had seen other creative approaches, even beyond just, sort of written forms, ways of getting thoughtful student feedback on courses.
All right, so traditionally we've offered the mid-semester student feedback sessions. You can contact our office and ask us to come in. We'll do a focus group type of thing. And then that kind of leads to a conversation about the kinds of things that students are saying. Unofficially, or anecdotally, I guess, you can say, I've had faculty come back and say just doing the feedback with students kind of frames their perspective a little bit better. Tasia's here too. We're actually looking at how we might kind of formalize some more of this process. A lot of faculty do informal feedback all on their own. I highly encourage faculty or instructors of any kind on campus to actually elicit some of this feedback and not wait until mid-semester, not wait until the end of the semester. The challenges for students is where's their motivation? Either they're really happy and they want to make sure that the instructor gets credit for all the hard work they've done, or they're really upset about their quiz grade or their test grade or their lack of motivation in the course or whatever, and it is sometimes reflected in how they rate the instructor. Knowing these kinds of things and where your students are at not only help you with your ratings at the end of the semester, but they also help give you a sense of where your students are at and what kinds of things you can do to make mid-course adjustments. So however you're collecting feedback from students, whether it's doing exit cards or minute papers or any of the classroom assessment techniques, if you haven't seen it, Angelo and Cross have a great book. It's a whole compendium of lots of different ways that you can collect classroom assessment from your students and kind of gather information about what kinds of things they're learning that help you to make adjustments in your course. It's floating around. There are several copies in the library. You can probably walk down the hall and find somebody that's got a copy of the Blue and Gold Cats book. So that's full of all kinds of different ideas that you can do, things you can do in your classroom to kind of gauge where your students are at. And also kind of helps to, I would encourage people, if you're doing those kinds of things, keep record of the kinds of feedback that you're getting from your students, because when it comes time to write your annual review, it's really helpful to have knowledge of what your students have done and then record what kinds of things that you've done in response to help your students learn. If you keep a diary or a portfolio, or put them somewhere, just don't let it, okay, I did it to manage whatever was happening this semester. If you keep record of those kinds of things, it'll make it much easier to write your annual review, or if you're going up for tenure and those kinds of things. So keep record of those kinds of things just for yourself.
Okay, Patty, you somewhat addressed what I was going to ask, and that is that ever since I first came here and we had the SIRS, the question I had was, okay, now what is it telling me? So I began to, in addition to the SIRS, occasionally I don't always do a mid-semester, but sometimes I do. But also at the end of the semester, there's an anonymous thing you don't put your name on that asks questions about different activities or topics or speakers or whatever we've done in the class, because that tells me something, whereas the SIRS has never really told me anything. So I'm wondering if there's some way, a question for Jeff, to somehow faculty be able to use those kinds of things also in terms of uploading them somewhere or utilizing them somehow.
Absolutely. So one unique thing that I heard that the College of Nursing has done is for the courses that are in D2L, they've implemented a form that faculty can fill out, like what kinds of things. There's questions about student situations and the perspectives, and what are the aspects of the students that have an impact on how this class works. There's questions about the content, there's questions about the delivery. And what's nice about this is this form follows the course from one semester to another. So if somebody else, a colleague, was teaching this course previously and you've just inherited this, you have at least a snapshot of what was happening in that course, and it's a simple thing. They added a survey to the last module of the D2L course, and it's shared broadly from one place to another. Kathy Poindexter was the person in nursing who told me about this, and I thought it was a brilliant idea because it doesn't take a whole lot of effort, and when it gives you as the faculty member some place to go and reflect on, and it also gives your colleagues some sense of what was happening in that class, especially if they're new. And I can only imagine the impact that it has on student learning when you have colleagues who are sharing this kind of information, because you can make adjustments before the class begins. And that's just one example. Did I answer your question, Eunice? Okay.
Thank you. Hi, Patty. So have we actually looked at the damage of SIRS down to teaching and learning?
So we do.
The question?
Oh, the question is how do we address the damage that can come from some of the impact? When Eunice had asked about how do I get anything out of the SIRS, I do think that probably the most valuable thing on there is the student writing comments. They can also be the most wounding. And I've had instructors at all levels contact me and say, can you walk through the SIRS with me because I need a friendly face, or somebody to kind of help go through this. So sometimes the consultation sessions end up being more therapy sessions. But I think one of the answers to this is I don't need to be the only place to go for support and help in kind of deciphering what the students are saying and how can you really make some real changes in your course, and set aside some of the hurtful comments or the any comments. There are lots of things that students say in there that are just really inappropriate. And I think if we had a culture where you could actually find colleagues that you can go through this and have a conversation about what does it mean when these students say this. Or a lot of times, I think the one I see most often is the course is confusing or disorganized. There are lots of reasons why the students may say that. Some of it falls back on the students, some of it falls on the instructor, some of it may fall on the curriculum and how the courses fit together. So being able to find somebody that you can sit down and trust and talk to about, okay, what kinds of things are happening in this class, and then maybe your colleague can say, well, I've experienced that teaching XYZ course as well. What we're trying to build is a community that helps support those kinds of conversations that are actually safe and effective, not where you have to worry about people talking about the kinds of things that, awful things that students might have said in your course. Unfortunately, they come out because you find them on Rate My Professor or what are some of the other ones? It comes out. And, but the way to combat that, I think, is to build more community around teaching and make it safe for faculty to try new things in their course and actually receive that feedback in other ways. And that comes from collegial support, because I can't sit down with each and every one of you and every semester and go through all of the SIRs. But what we're trying to do is develop more community where we actually can facilitate some of those conversations better. There's a question back here.
On that same point, one of the things I was just kind of thinking through as you were talking is the involvement of the students in that SIRS and understanding what their comments really mean as well, and doing that in the beginning of the class to say, don't wait until the SIRS comes out to tell me what you really think. Tell me now so that I can make corrections. And so I've been encouraging students in my class too, not just in my class, but in other classes, don't wait for that SIRS, because then you're just fed up and angered, and then it comes out there. So I think the students need to be involved in that conversation immensely.
Right, that's a fantastic point. So she indicated that it's really important to give students opportunities to give you feedback so that you're not waiting. Don't give them time and space to actually give you that feedback that doesn't wait until the end of the semester, because then you can actually problem solve, and it actually builds much more of a rapport with your students as well. Great point, thank you.
I actually have a question, Patty, and maybe Jeff too. I think many of the people in the room are sort of like preaching to the choir, right? We all are here because we recognize that we need to change how we evaluate teaching and learning, and I think we all want to have the conversations and shift the culture. I'm wondering if you could just share some sort of on-the-grounds tips for how we could help be the change in terms of changing that culture in all of our units and getting people talking about teaching and learning, normalizing the experiences that happen in the classroom, and really getting people in that space and feeling the safe, warm fuzzies about talking about teaching and learning.
Well, I'll pass it over to Jeff for the broader picture, but one thing I've seen, especially with the Adams Academy Fellows over the last couple of years, these folks self-select to sit around and talk about teaching. They openly share the things that have worked in their classroom and the things that have miserably failed. And we meet each month throughout the academic year, and usually about the third meeting in, people know each other pretty well, and we start to introduce this idea that we're going to observe each other's classrooms. And you're going to be expected to have a conversation that involves better feedback than, oh, you did a really great job, I really liked when you did this. We talk to them about how to structure constructive feedback that actually helps your colleague develop, not just a pat on the back or a critique of what happened in that one moment in time. The classroom observation should be an opportunity to start having those conversations with the colleague. And even the Adams Academy Fellows are really uncomfortable doing that. And when we do a report out, we give them 2 months to do it. So by the 5th session, they come back and they start talking about these things. And it inevitably always starts out with, oh, I went to Bill's class, and Bill is a great lecturer. He's fantastic. I loved how he approached that topic, and I really loved the content when he was talking about X, Y, and Z. I learned a lot. Well, that's not entirely helpful to Bill, because if you approach teaching as a continuous improvement process, that doesn't give Bill a whole lot of feedback on what he can do next. So what we're trying to do is structure those conversations, but they're difficult.
So on the practical level, we're trying to be very intentional about how we use the toolkit. So that's why the workshop-y sessions that we'll be advertising are intended for groups of colleagues to participate in together. And we're going to do more and more of that. We're going to try and model the kinds of behaviors in terms of how we act as educators in in how we interact with other educators on campus and how we encourage you to interact with your colleagues. So that's why we want to encourage you to bring a set of colleagues with you from your unit to work together on the kind of culture you want in your unit around teaching and learning. So I've been a faculty member for a really long time, and I was a department chair, and it's only been the last couple of years that I've had to learn how to think like a university, which is really what I have to do in a provost's office, right? I have to learn how to think across the university, and in a way in which everybody wins. So in the work that I do, if somebody doesn't succeed, this is bad, right? I got to find win-wins all over campus in the job that I've been given. One of the things that I think is true, and I've appreciated it more in the last couple of years, is that faculty have a tremendous amount of agency about the kinds of cultures that they have in their units. And the more I do this job, the more I believe this to be true. So where I'm going with this is you have all of the agency you need to create the culture you want. And as a faculty member, as a mentor of junior faculty members for a long time, I think we've given each other overly narrow paths to success. And there are lots of ways, and there should be lots of ways, to be a spectacular faculty member at an institution like Michigan State University. And when we continually put ourselves on a narrow path to success and value, and we all know roughly what that narrow path looks like in our units, I think we do ourselves a disservice, we do our colleagues a disservice, and we do our students a disservice. I am confident that at the provost's office level, at least, there are multiple paths to being spectacularly successful on this campus. Where the agency truly resides is with faculty. And so one of the things that we will try to do with regard to culture is create opportunities for faculty to work together to create the version of Michigan State University that they want. And I'll just leave it there.
One thing I wanted to talk about was the plans that the College of Ag and Natural Resources have in terms of taking this approach. I'm going to be working with Laura and Kelly in terms of trying to operationalize the toolkit. What we plan to do is to have training sessions with our chairs and school directors in how one uses the toolkit, how it can be incorporated in terms of annual review, and then also reappointment, tenure, and promotion. We also want to work with thought leaders in each of the units, faculty thought leaders, because it's really critical to get those people to understand, give us feedback on how we can really implement using the toolkit. We want to move away from having SIRS and contact hours with students being the way people are evaluated in terms of teaching and student learning. So that's our plan, and we'll get back to you. Pardon?
Woohoo!
And the RPT committee also. We'll be training them in terms of the college level RPT committee in terms of how this will change people's dossiers, what kind of information they're going to be supplying to the dossier in terms of their evaluation. Thanks.
So this has been a great workshop for me, and Suzanne, your last comment really segues into exactly my question. It is great to see that people are thinking about new and better ways of evaluating teaching, but RPT season is now. Our RPT committees are starting to meet this week. What I've heard today makes me wonder whether I should just tell the RPT committee members to totally disregard the SIRS. Don't even think about them when you're evaluating this candidate for reappointment, promotion, or tenure. And there are other things in Form D, for example, that we can go on. Is there any, and why are we asking for this information in the first place if it's so flawed? So it's going to take a while for these changes to be implemented. Can we start now saying, forget the freaking SIRS and let's think about something else?
Absolutely. Amen, sister. But I think what we're trying to do in terms of our culture is look at alignment, okay? Look at what the learning outcomes are for the class, what are the exercises and evaluation of learning that's going on, and do they fit the learning outcomes? So that's one way. But we really are encouraging people to look beyond in annual review that then leads into the narrative for reappointment, tenure, and promotion. Some of the things that were done in animal science were really critical when Janice was there, because she sat down with her faculty and went over those types of topics.
One of the real basic flaws of the SIRS forms is that it doesn't take into consideration those courses that are online only. They've been developed for courses that are in person rather than online. And so that's a big thing. And as an online teacher, I face that quite a bit. So.
So I come from the same college as Cheryl, and 9 years ago now, I had the pleasure of chairing our college's ad hoc committee on teaching evaluation, where one of the things we learned within our own college is the barrier posed by diversity of cultures within departments. And so I know about our RPT process. I know that we are getting folders now, and what you get to see is what the department gives you. And we can specify all we want, but often what colors what you get from department chairs is what the culture of the department has decided should be forwarded. And so this gets back to Jeff's comment. In a way, what people can do is influence the culture of their departments, because at the dean's office level, if you're not in a small college, if you're in a big college, what you're getting is what the chair decided to tell you. And the chair is reflecting the department's culture. So the outcome of this report now, 7-8 years ago, was that teaching evaluation should be multidimensional. You should learn something from the students and from peer observations and from the candidate themselves what they consider to be excellent. And all those elements should be present. We found it very difficult to specify uniformly across our departments in an acceptable way what they should bring forward. And we ended up saying, well, all these elements should be present. You departments, it's up to you what to give forward. That's what causes it to devolve down to department culture. And it comes down to, what does your department value? The dean's office would love to reward good teaching. We can only do so if the department tells us the right things. And right now, you're faced with a bunch of departments who have decided just to give you SIRS.
Not to be the CNS roadshow, but one of the things that I think we need to talk about in lieu of having a better system at the moment, there's all these efforts to create a better system, but is to talk about the flawed nature of the SIRS when you're discussing these packages. So if we're not going to completely throw them out, we still ought to have some conversation about the fact that they're flawed, that they're biased, particularly against women and faculty of color, and that needs to be taken into consideration. If we can raise awareness about the flawed nature of SIRS, that at least will contribute to people evaluating this in a more thoughtful way. And so I think it's worth it when you start those meetings, Cheryl, for example, or on your FACs, things like that, to highlight those differences. And there's a whole body of literature that I'm sure Patty can point us in the right direction to, where people have researched this to show the nature of those flaws. So making people aware, I think, is key. And now we have this group that it's on the top of their minds, and sharing that with others will help. Other questions or comments? Did I completely stop the conversation there? That was certainly not my intent. Anything else? Okay, well, I think this was a great start to a conversation, and one of the things that Kendra and I were talking about is maybe following up this particular workshop with something else on teaching and learning in April. So continuing to have these conversations in your various units, but maybe this group could offer a continuation formally about these conversations. Again, 4 weeks from today, we'll be having another STEM Teaching Essentials workshops, and you'll be hearing from the different folks in your units about that, so please consider attending that. We'll normally be back over in BPS. And if you didn't get an evaluation form, please get an evaluation form from Laura and fill that out before you go. Thanks everybody for coming, and thank you to our presenters. That was very useful.